Oi, oi, here we are again, back in today. Not going to explain so much today because I've done a lot of explaining already, but just remember there's the little drop down menu somewhere under this where you can find all of the materials and more for today's class. Today, guilt. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about guilt. Today's topic is guilt. Now, everybody feels guilty. Oscar Wilde, I mentioned him in a previous video. He spoke about guilt as being a sort of a luxury that we can blame ourselves. Other people aren't blaming us, we're sort of blaming ourselves. It's difficult to think of guilt as a luxury though, I think sometimes. Lots of guilt in songs. And I'm never gonna dance again. Guilty feet ain't got no head. Never mind. Okay, guilt. Let's go first of all, before we get on to today's reading. Now today's reading is quite a long, advanced reading. Very good reading though. So stay with it. It's all down there. And there's some vocab as well to go with it. Okay, so let's go first of all to a magazine called Psychology Today. You know, not one of my top reads, but let's see what they've got to say about guilt. Psychology Today tell us that we experience guilt, guilty feelings for about 5 hours every week. That's a lot of guilt we're feeling, yeah? And then it says that guilt, which is unresolved, you know, something you feel guilty about, but you didn't really fix it. I could spend half an hour here confessing about things which I feel guilty about, but I don't think we should go into that right now. Unresolved guilt which you haven't really fixed, is kind of like a snooze button on your alarm clock. It just keeps going off and going off and going off. But we know that anyway, don't we? This is another one of the obvious. Guilt makes us fail to enjoy life. Okay, apparently there was a study done with some students. You had half of the students were made to feel guilty, and the other half of the students were normal, not made to feel guilty. And then they give both sets of students some extra cash for the university, you know, to spend. And the students who felt not guilty, the students who felt sort of, you know, normal, extra cash, thank you very much. And so they spent it on, you know, things like music or going out or things like that, and enjoyed it. The guilty students spent it on school supplies. So it stops you enjoying life. There you go. Guilt, actually, there's some of you might have read the Harry Potter books. There's a thing called the Dobby effect, apparently, which is sort of beating yourself up over guilt. I haven't read Harry Potter. I recommend it. I think lots of children enjoy it. But I have no idea what the Dobby effect is, but please find out for yourselves. And also, of course, another thing is guilt tends to make us sort of avoid people if we're feeling bad. You know, if you've done something wrong to someone, or you feel you've done something wrong to someone, you tend to avoid them. And sometimes that other person isn't even aware of that. Again, this is something you probably know, but you know, that's another thing that guilt does. This is Psychology Today. It seems all quite obvious. Anyway, we're cracking on because I'm going to go through the first part as quickly as I can today because, you know, as I said, the reading is a little bit of a longer one. Voice is a bit croaky today, but it should match the reading. Anyway, so we've looked about a little bit about how guilt is, and but what makes us feel guilty? Well, here we go. I've gone to Britain this time, and here's a selection of things which make, you know, people feel guilty day to day. I'm not talking, you know, about, you know, doing something terrible. You know, things that make people feel sort of a little bit guilty. Let's see how many of these you've actually felt. Here's one: not calling family and friends often enough, not contacting with people. There you go. A lot of people on their own right now. Phone your gran. Number two, another one. Not sticking to a healthy eating plan. Another one, yes. You feel a bit guilty, you know, not sticking to a healthy eating plan. Obviously, some of us maybe not getting as much exercise as we usually do, but let's try to eat healthier. Here's one for me: not going to the gym. Yeah, I suffer with that. Yeah. Another one: not taking advice, even not taking your own advice. You know, you think to yourself, oh, I should do something, and then you say, nah, and that makes you feel guilty, apparently. Gossiping is another one. Do you do that? Staying in your pajamas all day. Hello, that's you. Staying in your pajamas all day, yes. Another one is pretending you're working when actually you're watching something incredibly enjoyable on your phone or computer. Now, this is what you guys are all doing right now. No. Not finishing a book. Yeah, no, I always try. But then if I can't finish, it's not my fault. You know, it's the writer's fault or somebody else's fault. I don't feel good about that. Ignoring friend requests on social media. Yeah. I've got a bunch of friend requests right now, I think on my Facebook, but that's because I don't use Facebook. I stopped using Facebook, deleted it. But that's another story, isn't it? There we go. But there's a kind of softer edge to guilt. This thing which we call guilty pleasures. Everybody's got guilty pleasures, right? You have something which you do. You shouldn't really do it, but it's nice. America. Top guilty pleasures. How many of these are you guilty of? Guilty pleasures: ordering takeout food when you can't be bothered to cook. That's 42% of Americans have that as a guilty pleasure. Okay. Falling asleep while watching television, 41%. I do that. It's lovely. Absolutely gorgeous. I love doing that. Falling asleep while watching television. I do that all the time. I have to ask Hugo what the heck's going on. Extra scoop of ice cream. Is this America's guilty pleasures or Gavin's guilty pleasures? Yes, that's another one for me. Salted caramel. Total weakness for salted caramel ice cream. Love it. Singing out loud in the car. No, I stopped that when I was about 12. But maybe your family is one of those families, you know, you're driving along in your family wagon or whatever, and you all sing along together. Can't imagine many of you doing that, but I'd like to think that you do. Binging on a whole TV show in one day. TV binging. Yep. Still listening to music you listened to when you were a little kid. That's another good one. Oh dear. Eating an entire bag of chips in one sitting. There you go. You get one of those big bags of chips and you eat. And there's a reason for this. I mean, it's a very good reason. They just don't taste as good the next day when the packet's been opened, do they? So, you know, you've got to, haven't you? Checking social media while you're studying. Please don't do that right now. I'm sure you've got all of these little messages which are really important from Instagram or Snapchat or something. Pop, pop, pop. Try not to. Well, maybe better, more interesting than what's going on right now. Watching reality TV. I don't do that. I really can't stand reality TV. It's just people, it's that celebrity thing which we had before. People just massive egos who just want to be on TV. I really don't understand that. Here's one. Oh, I hope you're not doing this. I don't do this. Not showering. And some of you have done that. Okay, and this is the final one. stalking other people on social media. Now, only 15% say this is a guilty pleasure. I am way sure that more than 15% of Americans stalk people on social media. So there you go, guilty pleasures, which are yours. Also, if possible, comment section. Please put some comments in the comment section if you've got any guilty pleasures or guilty things. Well, not terrible guilty things. Please don't, confess to any crimes. But guilty pleasures underneath in the comment section. That would be nice. Thank you. Sooner or later, and I hope sooner, that we're going to be making this into a more sort of official looking sort of thing using Google Classrooms. I hope. I have no idea how to use Google Classrooms yet, but I hope I'll learn quickly. I hope I've got a growth mindset with that, and I can use Google Classrooms and we can put this up. But then if we do that, that is real torture time, because then we can start, seeing who's actually working, who's not working, and start actually scoring you on some of the things. Get some reading, writing done, things like that. So onwards, let's go on now to today's reading. As I said, reading today is a longer reading, but it's a reading which I kind of enjoy, a little bit dark. It's from one of my favorite writers, particularly when I was kind of a bit younger as well, and sort of like more horror sort of stories, things which are a bit more spooky. And the granddaddy of all horror is this guy here. His name is Edgar Allan Poe. This is him. Now, Edgar Allan Poe, we're going to learn a little bit about him we learn a little bit about him in Chusan, I think. So I'm not going to go into too many details on Poe's life. I'll just give you a few sort of the top highlights. Not really highlights. Top, things about Poe which are kind of interesting. He was born. He was an American, and he was born in Boston, and he had a very, very sad life. Both his parents died when he was young. Lived in England for a while, went back to America, became a journalist. He's actually not famous for this, but actually he was a critic and sort of became one of the first critics who were really sort of a little bit nasty in their criticism. He was, made very, very witty and sarcastic comments about some of the things. And so he kind of developed a new style of literary criticism, which not many people sort of give him credit for, because everyone concentrates on the darker side of his work. Mostly he wrote, he's famous for short stories and poems. And most of these short stories and poems are really kind of quite dark, quite sort of gothic. And but wonder why? Well, obviously he had a very sad life. But he also did some very, very not very good things. For example, this. This is Poe's cousin. He married her when she was 13. He was twice her age. And he married his 13-year-old cousin, which is kind of weird, right? I hope you're not sort of sitting there going, that's normal. It's a little bit weird. He married his 13-year-old cousin. And actually, sadly, she died less than 10 years later. She was very sad, had a sad life. And some people think, well, maybe this is also what sort of pushed him over the edge and gave him this darkness, which later sort of ran all the way through his literature and poetry as a theme. And he also, he didn't live well. He drank too much, and he wasn't stable character. And even his death is a bit of a mystery. he disappeared for several days and reappeared in another part of America. And nobody knows why or how. Very strange. But my favorite, I'm going to share this with you, and I'm sharing this with you because I think it's a great little story about Poe, and the other thing I think is that hopefully most of you will have forgotten this by the time we get to class, and I probably tell you this story again. But this is a great little story, true story. So Poe only actually wrote one book, one novel, one long novel. Most of his stuff, as I said, was short stories and poetry. And he wrote it in 1893. And it had a very, very long name, and it was not a very catchy name. It was called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. And this is the story, one part of the story in this book. Remember, first point, this book was written in 1838. Remember that. Now, this book was about a ship, and the ship sank. There was an accident, the ship sank, and so some of the crew of the ship survived in a little boat, right, a little lifeboat, and then they were, the usual thing, no food, no water. They're all dying, and they do manage to catch a turtle, I think, and they eat the turtle, but still then it gets on and on and on, and they're dying. They've got no food, no water. This is where things get a little bit like Poe, a little bit dark. So what they decide to do is they draw straws. When you do that, who gets the longest straw? I could have done this a bit better than with my fingers. Shortest straw is the loser. And the shortest straw went to a guy called Richard Parker. Remember that. Richard Parker drew the shortest straw. What did they do? Poe made his characters. They killed Richard Parker and they ate him up. Okay? All right. So far, so normal for a grisly story. Cannibalism. Now, Poe himself actually didn't like this book very much. He actually described it, I think, as very silly. And so far, I think you'll agree it is a bit silly. But in 1884, and remember this is 45 years later, a ship called the Mignonette. That's not really important, is it? Anyway, it left England, and they were trying to go to Australia, which obviously is quite a long trip. And this ship sank in a storm. They escaped, and they were in a little boat, the 4 men, I think it was. And they managed to catch a turtle and eat the turtle. Okay. But what happened then was one of the men fell over the side of the boat. It was he drank too much seawater. Now, I don't know how much you know about this, but if you drink seawater trying to survive, it makes you sick. You go crazy. And he drank too much seawater. They pulled him back in, and he was not in a good condition. He was dying. And so what happened? These men, in this story, 45 years later, they decided the only way that we can survive is to actually eat that guy there. And so they did. They killed him and they ate him. Now, so far, this is a massive coincidence, right? 45 years later, a ship, okay, falls over the sea. They eat a turtle. Okay, so far, yeah, not a big coincidence. This is the thing that's really kind of spooky. The name of the person who fell over the side of the ship and was killed and cannibalized, his name in real life was Richard Parker. The same name as the guy from Poe's story 45 years earlier. Terrifying. Anyway, let's see. Now, we're going to get on to the story today. And today's story, as I said, is a little bit longer. You might have downloaded it, as you'll see. There's a download there, a little bit different. Today, we're not on British Council. It's a different thing. And the question's actually a little bit more difficult. And also, what I really like is there's some juicy writing exercises there. And when we get this, hopefully this Google class going, we're going to do a little bit more writing. Because we don't do really enough writing in school, do we? Because when I say we're going to write something, your little faces just... But anyway, let's see. We're going to get on to the vocab now. As I said, this reading today is a little bit more challenging. So the vocab also, a little bit more of it, and a little bit more high level maybe. And also please remember that Poe was writing over 150 years ago. English has changed quite a lot. It's changing all the time. But here we go. First word, vocab. Hearken. That means to listen carefully. Okay. Hearken, to listen carefully. Next word here. Great word, this. Dissimulation. 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 Dissimulation means kind of, it's a good word. We use that in English today. Well, not many people use it. People with a good vocabulary use it. Dissimulation means to sort of hide your feelings, yeah? to sort of change the subject, and to sort of hide the truth. Another word here, sagacity, sagacity, okay. Sagacity comes from the word sage, which means wise, which means intelligent, which means smart. So basically this means smartness. Okay, here's another word. Oh no, my fingers are all thumbs. Supposition. Supposition is another word. Supposition means to suppose. It means when you kind of assume something, you guess something. I guess, I suppose, supposition. We got that sort of thing, yeah. Here's another word for us. I'm gonna put that on the floor too. Yeah, oh, I'm looking at it, sorry. Suavity, there you go. Suave, suavity. If you're suave, you're smooth, you're cool, okay? Unlike what's going on right now on the video in front of you, suavity, okay? To be suave, to be cool, to be smooth. Another word, this is a good one. Maybe you know this one. Gesticulation. Everyone, I think, knows the word gesture, right? Yeah, gestures. That was a worse gesture. What was that? That wasn't even a gesture. But gestures, you know, to gesture something, you know, what we try to tell you to do when you're making speeches. Gestures, use gestures. Gesticulation. Okay, and finally, another great word actually. This one here. Dissemble. That's when you pretend not to notice something. Okay, dissemble. You sort of hide your feelings. You pretend not to notice something. So there you go. Dissemble. That's another great word actually. There's two D words there which I really like. Dissimulation. If you can drop that into something like a conversation, it makes you sound very, very smart. And dissemble. Oh, you're dissembling, which basically means you're sort of hiding you're hiding the truth and pretending not to notice something. Yeah. Anyway, let's bang on now. As I said, today's reading is a longer reading. I haven't practiced this reading at all. I do know the story very well, but as many of Poe's stories, it's written from the first person. It's the narrator is, you know, it's kind of like Poe himself. I think he put a lot of himself into his stories. which is really scary. I wouldn't like to have known him. Anyway, I'm going to read this. I'm going to have to drink some tea. Stay with it if you can. I'll try and bang through it as quickly as I can. I'll try and do it as well as I can. As I said, trying to do this in one take. So I'm going to mess this up in all sorts of ways, but let's see how we go, yeah? Are you ready? Now this story is called, it's called The Telltale Heart. It's one of Poe's most famous short stories. True, nervous, very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why? Why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed nor dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing, acute, very good hearing. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, once it came, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none, passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now, this is the point. You fancy me mad? Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out, and then thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me about an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously, oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now, you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour, I did not move a muscle. And in the meantime, I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan. I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no! It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up in my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise. When he had turned in the bed, his fears had never ever since been growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless and could not. He had been saying to himself, "It's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he'd been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited for a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very little crevice in the lantern. And so I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot from out of the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a vidious veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray of light as if by instinct precisely upon that damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense. Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound very well. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could to maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. Grew louder, I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me what I have told you, that I am nervous, so I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet, for some minutes longer, I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder, though the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him, and then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will no longer think so when I describe the wise precaution I took for the concealment, the hiding of the body. The night waned and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs, and then took up 3 planks from the floor of the bedroom chamber and deposited all between the scantlings, the floorboards, and then I replaced the floorboards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. When I had made all the end of these labours, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, but for what had I now to fear? Nothing. There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbour during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own. In a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his many treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which the reposed corpse of the victim lay. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things, but before long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone, and my head ached, and I fancied I heard a ringing in my ears, but still they sat and they chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale. I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, and yet the sound increased, and what could I do now? It was a low, dull, quick sound, such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, and the noise steadily increased. I arose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations. But the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to the fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed. I raved. I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder and louder and louder. Still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it not possible? They heard it not. Almighty God, no, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a horror. No, they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt I must scream or die, and now again. Hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here, here. 'Tis the beating of his hideous heart. Cup of tea. I hope you enjoyed that. Please come to my classes. There are some exercises for you to do. These are a little more difficult. And please take a look at the writings. Take a look at the writings, do some writing, submit some work. Gonna try and make these things a little more official, a little better and better next week. Thank you again for coming. Guilt.